The neighborhood had always felt peaceful, a cozy suburb lined with tall trees, manicured lawns, and just enough bird noise to make mornings pleasant. For years, the homeowner enjoyed his quiet space, tending to his yard, watering his rose bushes, and watching the towering oak trees sway in the afternoon breeze. Those trees were his pride, planted by the previous owners decades ago, and grown into strong symbols of history and shade. They weren't wild or neglected. They were simply natural, mature, and majestic. But peace doesn't last long where a power-hungry HOA president exists. And in this community, she didn't just exist, she thrived. Her name, whispered with annoyance across driveways and mailboxes, was Karen. Not just any Karen, but the type who measured lawns with rulers and slid violation notices into mailboxes like she was delivering justice to a lawless frontier. The first sign of trouble came quietly. A plain envelope tucked into the mailbox, bearing the cold stamp of the HOA. Inside, a letter accusing the homeowner of overgrown vegetation, stating that his trees were a visual obstruction, and warning of fines if they were not trimmed immediately. He stared at the letter, confusion melting quickly into frustration. The trees weren't wild. They weren't blocking sidewalks, driveways, or streetlights. They were just tall, healthy, flourishing. But power doesn't need a reason. It only needs a target. And now, the trees had become evidence in Karen's self-declared crusade against yard negligence. He looked around the neighborhood. There were other trees, plenty, some leaning closer to power lines than his ever did, but none of those belonged to him. And that alone explained why no letters reached their owners. 8 minutes into reading that notice and pacing across his porch, a thought landed heavy in his mind. This wasn't about trees, it was about control. It was about showing who ran the neighborhood, who pulled the strings, who demanded obedience. Before we go deeper into this dramatic HOA showdown, make sure you like this video, subscribe for more wild homeowner stories, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Also, have you ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA? I want to hear your battle tales. He placed the letter on his kitchen table like a declaration of war. The fine, if unpaid, would escalate. The ultimatum was clear: trim the trees or face consequences. But he wasn't going to roll over. Not this time. He researched local landscaping regulations, city ordinances, and environmental protection clauses. The trees were 100% compliant. There was no legal reason for trimming. But the HOA didn't care about fairness. It cared about authority. The following morning, he made a decision. Not to ignore the HOA, not to give in, but to play smart. He hired professionals, not because he needed to, but because he wanted receipts. Certified arborists confirmed the trees were perfectly healthy and within all legal guidelines. They trimmed a few branches just enough to say it was done. Nothing excessive, nothing damaging, nothing Karen could complain about. When the job was finished, small piles of perfectly cut branches lay neatly stacked. The wood smelled clean and fresh, and that was when an idea took root, an idea as satisfying as shade on a summer day. Why throw the wood away? Why let it rot or be hauled off at cost? Why not turn this petty HOA demand into something useful, public, and visible? He gathered the wood, split the thicker pieces, bundled it carefully with twine, and placed it on a stand at the end of his driveway. A handwritten sign stood proudly above: "Free firewood for neighbors, courtesy of the HOA." The first neighbors who passed by slowed, looked, chuckled, then grabbed bundles. Word spread fast. The same trees the HOA called a problem were now fueling fireplaces, backyard fire pits, and winter warmth. And as logs disappeared, piece by piece, something else happened. Whispers, conversations, laughter across driveways, support. Neighbors who once waved politely now walked up, shook his hand, and thanked him. Some even joked about secretly hoping Karen would target their trees next. He hadn't just trimmed branches. He trimmed Karen's narrative. Karen had wanted him to be a villain, a negligent homeowner who needed discipline. Instead, he became the generous neighbor offering warmth to the community. And in petty politics, optics are everything. Karen, however, was not amused. The firewood stand caught her eye like a thorn in a rose garden. Complaints began to circulate. She stomped down the street to inspect it personally, face tight with outrage. She snapped photos, scribbled notes, and marched away like she'd discovered illegal contraband instead of free fire fuel. But while she fumed, the community smiled. Because for the first time, someone had stood up, not with anger or disobedience, but with creativity and kindness. And this was only the beginning. Karen wasn't going to let public embarrassment go unanswered, and he wasn't going to let his peace, his trees, or his principles be trampled. The battle between overreach and resilience had begun, not with shouting, but with split logs and quiet rebellion. Next, Karen will escalate. And the homeowner? He'll turn this into a neighborhood movement. Word traveled fast in the quiet suburban streets, faster than fallen leaves drifting across freshly swept driveways. Neighbors talked. Pickup trucks slowed at the corner. People who once only offered polite nods now rolled down their windows, waved, and complimented the unexpected community effort. The once simple driveway now served as a cheerful gathering spot, where a pile of neatly stacked firewood symbolized unity, warmth, and just the right amount of petty victory. But every positive reaction in the neighborhood was matched by one person's boiling frustration. Karen. She observed the scene from behind her blinds like a hawk tracking prey. For her, this wasn't an act of goodwill. It was insubordination, public mockery of her authority. The sight of smiling neighbors collecting firewood turned her irritation into mission mode. She would not allow kindness to overshadow control. Not on her watch. Not in her domain. The next morning, there it was again. Another official envelope from the HOA. The homeowner didn't even need to open it to know who was behind it. The wording confirmed his suspicion. Unauthorized yard display, community standards violation, and a demand to remove the firewood stand immediately. She wanted silence, compliance, defeat, but he had no intention of bowing. He read the notice calmly, set it aside, and walked out to his driveway. The sun filtered through the trimmed oak branches, warm and golden. He breathed in, steady and patient. If Karen wanted a battle of standards and rules, he'd meet her there, prepared, informed, and grounded in common sense and documented legalities. He reviewed the city codes again. Driveway displays? Allowed. Temporary property items? Allowed. Non-commercial free sharing? Encouraged. Nothing violated local ordinances. The HOA could suggest, but not impose, restrictions where none legally existed. And if this was a hill Karen chose to stand on, he would gladly turn it into a mountain. Over the next week, something beautiful happened. The firewood stand didn't just remain, it grew. Neighbors began bringing their own branches and logs, dropping them off with friendly waves or quiet thumbs up, almost like they were participating in a secret rebellion club. A handwritten sign was added by someone in the community, taped gently to the post. Community would share. Be kind. Take only what you need. It wasn't just his stand anymore. It was the neighborhood stand. Every log collected symbolized warmth. Every bundle taken represented community resilience. The sentiment grew stronger than the woodpile itself. When authority becomes petty, people unite. Karen, however, was reaching new levels of disbelief. This wasn't just a violation anymore. This was defiance spreading like wildfire. She marched from house to house, clipboard in hand, demanding signatures for stricter yard control rules. But door after door gently shut with polite refusals. Her power, once unquestioned, suddenly felt fragile. Meanwhile, the homeowner kept calm. No shouting, no confrontation. His best defense was presence, kindness, and preparation. When Karen tried to accuse him again, he simply produced documents, city codes, and photos of properly trimmed trees. She sputtered, flustered, unable to form arguments strong enough to counter legality and logic. The more she pushed, the more composed he remained, showing the difference between control and leadership. And yet, she didn't stop. One afternoon, a notice appeared not just in his mailbox, but taped boldly to his door. An emergency HOA compliance request, demanding immediate removal of all firewood and forbidding any future community distribution. The tone was severe, far more aggressive than necessary. It felt personal now. But while she escalated on paper, he escalated in impact. He crafted a new sign, neat and simple. Free firewood program, supporting neighbors and promoting sustainable yard maintenance. A second, smaller sign hung beneath. Trimmed per certified arborist, compliant with city code. And with that, his message became more than petty pushback. It became a public demonstration of civic responsibility. Neighbors walked by with admiration, some offering friendly pats on the shoulder, others promising support if the HOA tried anything more drastic. Karen tried gathering witnesses, tried nitpicking branch sizes, tried arguing that public access to the woodpile encouraged yard waste distribution. But this was firewood, not debris. Nice bundles, clean cuts, stacked with care. Her arguments sounded less like regulation and more like rage disguised as policy. Days passed, and her frustration turned into desperation. Eventually, the HOA announced a mandatory inspection of the property, an attempt to intimidate and find a flaw, any flaw, that could give Karen the upper hand again. The homeowner welcomed it calmly. He knew panic gave power, and panic was Karen's game, not his. When the inspection day arrived, the officials walked the property quietly. They examined the trimmed trees, the clean lawn, the tidy yard. Their clipboards stayed still. Their pens barely moved. There was simply nothing wrong, not a thing they could penalize. Karen's face, tight and strained, told 1,000 stories of defeat. The officials nodded politely, thanked him, and left. The case was closed, not by argument, not by force, but by compliance and composure. She wanted a criminal. She got a model homeowner. Yet the tension didn't die. It hung in the air like storm clouds gathering. Because when a person obsessed with control loses power, they rarely retreat quietly. They retreat bitterly, planning their next strike. And indeed, Karen wasn't done. That evening, security cameras caught her angrily taking pictures of the firewood stand. Again. Rumor had it she was filing complaints with city code enforcement now, trying to escalate beyond the HOA's authority. What she didn't realize was this. Every battle she started only strengthened community loyalty toward him. Every action she took revealed her intentions clearer than any rumor ever could. Neighbors who once tolerated her now rolled their eyes, whispered complaints, and laughed about her obsessive policing. He wasn't just defending trees anymore. He was defending community spirit, proving that respect, patience, and subtle resistance can disarm even the most persistent busybody. By the end of the week, his wood stand wasn't just accepted, it was celebrated. A neighbor left hot cocoa packets in a small basket nearby. Someone added a tiny chalkboard sign reading, "Stay warm and stay united." And at that point, Karen realized something terrifying for her ego. The neighborhood didn't fear her anymore. They admired him instead. That kind of power, earned, not demanded, was something she could never achieve. But in her frustration, she made a decision. A desperate attempt to reclaim control. A move that would cross a line and change everything. Soon, she would no longer be fighting a tree-loving homeowner. She would be fighting public opinion, legal boundaries, and a united community. And the next chapter of this story would prove one thing, once and for all. When someone tries to cut down your roots, sometimes the best revenge is letting everyone see how deep they really go. The neighborhood had grown strangely vibrant since the wood stand appeared. People who once rushed indoors after work now took slow evening walks, enjoying the sense of quiet rebellion in the air. The homeowner's driveway had transformed into a symbol, not of defiance alone, but of community coexistence. Children waved when passing, elderly couples paused to chat, and the firewood kept disappearing. bundle after bundle, fueling fireplaces and backyard fire pits through chilly evenings. Yet, like a storm cloud unable to release rain, Karen hovered, growing darker and heavier each day. The HOA president couldn't accept the shift in neighborhood energy. She couldn't accept that her letters, warnings, and patrol-like walks had produced the opposite effect. Unity instead of obedience. Where she expected panic, she saw laughter. Where she hoped for embarrassment, she witnessed gratitude. Every bundle of wood taken felt like a personal attack on her authority. She needed a decisive blow, something bold, something she believed would remind everyone who held power in this community. In her mind, if she could destroy the source of this movement, she could reclaim respect. And so, one early morning, before sunrise, before coffee brewed in living rooms, before birds sang, she made her move. Security cameras caught her creeping down the street, jacket zipped high, clipboard abandoned in favor of garden shears and determination. She marched straight toward the property, eyes fixed on the trees like a soldier storming enemy ground. With wild frustration guiding her, she grabbed a low branch near the sidewalk, one of the few untouched pieces left, and began sawing furiously. She believed what she was doing was enforcement, restoration of order, the last gasp of authority. But in reality, it was trespassing, vandalism, a line crossed so boldly it could never be blurred again. The homeowner didn't respond with shouting or confrontation. He didn't storm outside or engage in theatrics. He simply watched the camera footage in disbelief, a slow, quiet anger replacing surprise. This wasn't just petty now. It was unlawful interference. And Karen had handed him exactly what she'd been trying so desperately to avoid. Proof. 2 hours later, the neighborhood woke up to an unusual sight. Not the wood stand this time, nor a passive-aggressive letter taped to a door. Instead, a printed still frame from the security camera hung at the firewood stand. Karen, mid-cut, frozen in the act like a monument to her own obsession. Beneath the photo, a new sign read, "Respect property, respect neighbors. These trees belong to all of us, and so does this community." People stopped, they stared, and they understood. The whispers that followed spread like wildfire. But this time, it wasn't amusement. It was disappointment, disgust, disbelief at the sheer lengths she had gone. Neighbors who once tolerated her leadership now found it embarrassing. Rather than keeping peace, she had broken it. Rather than protecting the neighborhood, she violated it. By afternoon, conversations circulated like a quiet revolution. A petition started, not by the homeowner, but by the residents. They had reached their limit. What once felt like guidance now felt like oppression, and what once resembled community oversight now looked like personal tyranny. The homeowner stayed silent, letting the truth speak for itself. He didn't celebrate, didn't brag, didn't antagonize. He simply continued stacking wood, continued smiling, continued being the person who uplifted instead of controlled. Soon, a meeting was called. Not a casual sit-down, a formal emergency HOA board gathering. The turnout shocked even longtime residents. People who had never attended before filled seats, arms crossed, expressions firm. The atmosphere wasn't angry, it was resolute. Karen walked in, expecting supporters. What she found instead were neighbors, armed not with anger, but with purpose. They spoke calmly, but with unwavering conviction. They quoted the HOA bylaws she herself had once wielded like a sword, pointing out misuses of authority, selective enforcement, harassment, and now, trespassing backed by video evidence. The board had no choice. Karen was removed. Her position, once untouchable, crumbled like brittle bark beneath winter frost. And as she walked out, stiff, stunned, stripped of control, the neighborhood exhaled. Peace didn't come with applause or celebration. It came with relief, the quiet kind that settles after a long storm finally breaks. In the days that followed, the board apologized. Rules were reviewed. Respect re-entered the community like sunlight after clouds drift away. The homeowner continued his firewood program, not out of spite, but because it had become something real, something meaningful. Neighbors continued dropping branches, wood continued disappearing, and slowly, gracefully, the story shifted from drama to warmth. His trees, once targeted as symbols of neglect, now stood proudly as symbols of unity, strong, healthy, undisturbed. Their branches stretched wide, just as they always had, offering shade and, indirectly, offering warmth. The firewood stand remained like a quiet monument to community power, a reminder that leadership isn't about control, it's about connection, that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from fighting, but from staying grounded while others uproot themselves in anger. And as winter settled in, chimneys around the neighborhood puffed soft smoke into cool skies. Children toasted marshmallows over backyard fires. Families gathered with blankets and hot cocoa. The neighborhood wasn't just a group of houses anymore. It was a community, all from a few tree branches, and one stubborn HOA Karen who didn't understand that real authority is earned, not demanded. In the end, the trees remained. The wood kept giving. The neighborhood grew stronger. And Karen? She learned, the hard way, that when you try to cut someone down, sometimes all you do is give them material to build something better.